You're standing on a beach and there's no land on the horizon. Not a smudge, not a haze that might be a coastline. Just water, all the way to the edge of what your eyes can resolve, and then more water past that, which you have no way of knowing about yet. The wind carries salt and nothing else. No bird flying a route that might suggest land. No drifting branch. No scent of smoke from a fire that isn't yours. Behind you is everything you know. Every person, every plant, every animal you've ever been able to name. Ahead of you is a raft made of lashed bamboo or hollowed logs, built by hands that have never built anything like it before, because nobody has. There is no proof land exists out there. There is no way to send a message back if you're wrong, and you are about to get on that raft anyway. This is, as far as anyone can currently tell, the very first time any human being, anywhere on Earth, ever did something quite like this entirely on purpose. For every hominin species before you, water like this was the end of the road. Homo erectus spread across most of Asia, reaching islands like Flores in what's now Indonesia. But those crossings happened over hundreds of thousands of years, almost certainly by accident. Individuals likely swept out on rafts of storm debris or tsunami wreckage, surviving by sheer luck rather than intention, washing up half drowned on whatever shore happened to be downstream. None of them ever got past a deep, permanent stretch of open ocean called the Wallace Line, separating the islands connected to Asia from the islands connected to Australia. The line is named for the naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, who noticed in the 1800s that the animals changed dramatically the moment you crossed it. Tigers and elephants on one side, kangaroos and marsupials on the other, because almost nothing had ever managed to cross that gap alive in either direction. On the far side of that line was an entire continent, Sahul, the combined landmass of Australia, New Guinea and Tasmania during the Ice Age, when sea levels were far lower than today and far more of it was dry land than now. And for hundreds of thousands of years, nothing that walked on two legs had ever set foot on it. So how do we actually know anyone made that crossing, rather than just assuming it must have happened because people live in Australia today? And how do we know roughly when? In 2017, an archaeologist named Chris Clarkson led a major excavation at a rock shelter in Australia's Northern Territory called Madjedbebe. His team recovered stone tools, ground ochre, and other artefacts from sediment layers, then used multiple independent dating methods to determine their age. The result, published in the journal Nature, pushed the confirmed date of human presence in Australia back to roughly 65,000 years ago, earlier than most researchers had previously accepted. People weren't just arriving in Australia. They had been living there for tens of thousands of years before anyone in Europe had even encountered a Neanderthal as far west as France. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Even at the lowest sea levels of the last ice age, when far more land was exposed than today, the gap between the islands of Sunda, the Asian continental shelf, and the islands of Sahul never fully closed. Depending on the exact route taken, crossing it still meant at least one stretch of open water, roughly 70 to 100 kilometres across, with no land visible from either shore. That's not island hopping along a coastline you can always see. That's committing to open ocean and trusting that something is waiting on the other side of a horizon that gives you no evidence either way. Picture what building for that crossing actually required. You don't have metal tools. You don't have rope, in the way you understand rope. You have plant fibre, twisted and braided by hand, strand by strand, into something strong enough to hold a raft together against waves that will try to tear it apart the entire way across. You have bamboo, if you're lucky enough to live somewhere it grows, cut and bundled into floats, or logs that have to be worked down with stone tools, one stroke at a time, into something that will actually carry a group of people instead of just yourself. Every joint, every lashing, every place 2 pieces of wood meet is a place the whole vessel could fail halfway across, with nothing around you but water in every direction. And once it's built, you still have to choose a direction, paddle against currents that don't care which way you're trying to go, and survive on whatever food and fresh water you manage to carry, for however many days the crossing takes, with absolutely no guarantee any of it will be enough. There's no shade out there except what you brought with you. No fresh water but what's in the containers at your feet. Just open sky, open water, and a direction someone had to choose with no way of confirming it was the right one. And critically, almost certainly, you probably weren't doing this alone. Genetic studies of Aboriginal Australian populations suggest the original founding group wasn't a single lucky survivor washed up on a beach. A population that starts from just 1 or 2 people, or even a few dozen, tends to leave a very specific genetic signature behind. Low diversity, the kind of narrow bottleneck you'd expect from a tiny founding group, passing the same limited set of genes down for thousands of generations. That signature isn't what shows up in the DNA. Instead, the genetic diversity researchers find suggests the original founding group had to be large, plausibly in the hundreds, arriving across what were likely multiple successful voyages rather than one. That means this wasn't one raft, one wild gamble that happened to pay off a single time. It was a sustained, repeated act, voyage after voyage, carrying enough people across the same impossible-looking gap again and again to build a population that could actually survive, find each other, and grow on the other side. An archaeologist named Sue O'Connor found something else that confirms just how capable these voyagers really were. At a site called Jerimalai in East Timor, her team excavated a rock shelter and sifted through thousands of fish bones preserved in its sediment, dated to around 42,000 years ago. Among them were the remains of deep-sea, open ocean species, tuna included, fish that don't swim into shallow water or wash up conveniently on a beach. Catching tuna simply isn't something you do by accident standing on the shore. It requires boats capable of operating well out at sea, real navigational skill to get there and back, and almost certainly some form of hook and line or netting technology sophisticated enough to land a fast, powerful fish in open water without losing the boat in the process. Within a few thousand years of reaching Sahel, in other words, people there weren't just barely surviving the ocean. They had learned to work it regularly, far from any shore, as a normal part of getting dinner. Here's the twist worth sitting with for a moment. This single act, crossing open water on purpose, with no way to know what was on the other side, may be the earliest solid evidence anywhere in the human story of long-range planning, large-scale cooperation, and a kind of confidence in collective technology that no earlier hominin had ever demonstrated. Stone tools show intelligence. Fire shows control over the environment. Both of those can, in principle, be figured out alone by one clever individual experimenting in isolation. A fleet of rafts is different. It requires a whole group to agree on a plan nobody can prove will work, build toward it together, and then actually go through with it more than once on the strength of nothing but the idea that there might be something out there worth finding. That shows something else entirely, a willingness to bet everything, collectively, on a place nobody in the group had ever seen with their own eyes. You're still that same species, carrying the same basic instinct forward. You just don't usually notice it because the unknown you face today rarely looks like open ocean with no land in sight. But every time you've gone somewhere new without knowing exactly what you'd find, a new city, a new job, a conversation you couldn't predict the outcome of, you were running the same basic program your ancestors ran on that beach, the one with no land on the horizon, no proof of anything waiting, and a raft they built anyway, betting everything on a horizon that, as far as they knew, might have been empty in every direction, forever.